Hello and welcome back around the bonfire. Thank you so much for joining us here. It's match day +1, and unfortunately, we are not celebrating another Chicago Fire victory, but that's all right because we're here with the fellas and we're going to do what we love to do. So it's positive in that sense, I suppose. But anyway, once again, joined by the best crew there is. We've got Mr. Tim. Tim, how are you feeling, brother?
Still here. That's the important thing. Survival's half the battle.
Yeah, I thought you were going to finish that thought, but you know what? Hey,
no, didn't think it was necessary.
Shout out to Treasure Planet and the lead singer of Goo Goo Dolls. I'm still here. You know Jim's theme. You know what's up. Alan is also here. The pole with the gold, the man with the sax. Alan, how are you faring on this fine Sunday?
Well, the goal is to finish this podcast and not have to dip, as I did last time. For context, my car that was parked in front of my house got hit by the neighbors, so I had to dip earlier than expected. So I apologize for that.
Wasn't me. Yeah. Now I'm starting to think it was DJ. He flew to Chicago and hit Alan's car just for fun. We'll all say
that denial was too quick, DJ.
I definitely didn't break into Alan's neighbor's car, back into his thing, and then leave immediately. Via teleportation.
We will all say a prayer to the patron saint of podcasts for Alan's car not to get hit. And of course, as you already know, DJ, our illustrious producer, stat man, and all around everything else is here as well. DJ, how's your day, man?
I just had pizza, so it's good.
DJ's mood has been steadily increasing the last few weeks, even with diminishing results. I don't know if you guys have noticed that too. So
there is a reason for that, and that's because the alligators now are wearing funny hats.
Okay.
I don't know what that means, but the good news is I have things to transition to. So, as we mentioned before, an unfortunate loss in New Jersey last night for the Chicago Fire Football Club. While the Fire did start the scoring, Jonathan Bamba opening his tally with MLS to score his first goal since he arrived in the United States. Unfortunately, we then saw Sam Rogers get hurt in the 37th minute. Looked like a non-contact injury. Given the depth at center back, going to be not something fun, but certainly something to keep an eye on this week and moving into next. And then in the 41st minute, Sergio Gomez scored and leveled it for RB for New York Red Bull. I almost said RB Leipzig. For New York Red Bull on a cross that caught Omar Gonzalez flat-footed shortly after coming back on. And then Kellyn Acosta fell over in the box just before halftime to give New York a penalty kick, which was converted by Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting. And Fire came out in the second half, played a little stronger. We saw a bit of an offensive flurry, but unfortunately wound up with their second loss of the year as they were unable to convert. Kind of big takeaways from this game was certainly the lack of depth. There's 7 players out, including Jack Elliott, who was listed as questionable, but did not end up traveling with the team. So even with the return of Kellyn Acosta, we were still net down players coming into last night. Tim, do you have anything you can share on Jack, on Leonardo, who also missed out last night? Any of the guys who will hopefully be coming back soon?
Yeah. No big update from Greg afterwards when we asked him about it. It's, I think it's frustrating. What I've been hearing is that it may have been a more serious injury than it was initially thought, or I guess hoped for, on Elliott. So we'll get more updates in the next coming days and see if he trains over the course of the week and talk to Greg about it on Thursday. But it's not great, right? Like the Fire were just getting back to full health, and then to have guys that are just kind of struck with injuries again, and especially because early on it was the midfield where there were no guys available basically, and at this point it's the back line, which already was not the deepest area for the Fire.
Yeah, certainly a tough outlook. As mentioned before, we saw Omar Gonzalez come on. Certainly was not ready, unfortunately. I can't blame him, right? 37th minute, not expecting to get on the field at that point. Saw that exposed kind of quickly after. And then in the second half, due to the fullback depth injury, right? Jonathan Dean still out with a punctured lung. Leonardo Barroso out with some form of lower body injury. We don't know exactly what the details are around that as of now. But we saw Justin Reynolds make his first MLS start in sometime. Was that his first MLS start? Am I making
Second
that up?
Altogether, he started one game last year. But there's been few and far between, and he hasn't been getting regular minutes, right? So to go from there's like a natural progression of guys getting like 15 minutes or something like that, some garbage time minutes for want of a better term. And then maybe you come on like in the 60th minute, 75th to eventually starting. This wasn't that. This was like, hey, we're going to like throw you into face off against Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting. So have fun with that.
If you love your kids, throw them into the deep end of the pool.
Basically what happened here, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and
Is
I'll
that about
say
a man that's what, 37 now?
it's 37. He can still ball, you know?
Yeah, he was still playing in the top flights in Europe last year, and that's been his whole career. And he's, you know, not been a guy that only got a couple of minutes along the way during that period.
And Tim, Alan, DJ, I'll kind of ask your guys' kind of general thoughts on Reynolds' performance, right? We saw about 60 minutes. You know, interestingly enough, from my perspective, right, just to kind of kick us off, I felt like defensively, I didn't have a ton of issues with his performance. I thought he played about the way I would expect him to, right? Certainly for a guy of his level, of his experience, he hasn't had a ton of time in MLS. I felt like going forward, we lost a lot of the kind of dynamic play that Leonardo Barroso felt. There were a lot of giveaways in the final third, not quite as confident on the ball. Now you could say maybe the whole team was a little bit like that. Alan, what were your thoughts?
My thoughts were, well, I mean, I agree. Justin Reynolds, especially in a defensive position, looked pretty good, but that midfield and that transition was lacking essentially. And some of the moments, especially in the first half, where either like Cuypers or Bombo or Zinkernagel like took off in counterattack was because of the fact that they just launched the ball forward. There was no like midfield progression, like you mentioned in the final third, or like just about reaching the final third, they would just give away the ball. They weren't comfortable in that area. And of course, part of that is injury. Part of that might still be getting used to the Greg Berhalter ball. But honestly, even with the result, I feel like you can definitely see I forgot what word I was going to use, like the philosophy of Greg Berhalter, like the philosophy of this team, how they're supposed to be playing. You could definitely see it, and you can see improvements there. But of course, injuries or like individual mistakes aren't helping. So
I don't know what
kind of. Yeah,
I don't know what you guys are seeing from Justin Reynolds that I wasn't, or the other way around, because I think he was kind of getting cooked a little bit on defense, and I think that that's one of the things that led to the opening goal against the Fire. I thought he didn't have anything close to the offensive toolkit that Leonardo Barroso does, right? Which explains why, like, one is a heralded, Portuguese, former like sporting, like academy player that is now, on a U22 deal in MLS, and the other's an MLS homegrown that hasn't been getting consistent minutes. But like he, I think, served some decent balls in the box. Like he did well to like win throw-ins a couple of times, but he also gave the ball away in defensive areas a couple of times. And I think he was just outworked and just like outrun and outplayed a lot. I mean, by my count, he had 7 defensive actions for a guy that played a little bit more than an hour of the game. Like that's not really enough from a right back in a game like this.
Yeah, I guess the perspective I guess I'm coming from is a little more, to be candid, based on the limited time we've seen from him, right? And I will not sit here and pretend that I've watched a ton of Fire too, so I'll caveat with that. I have a little bit actually higher expectation from him going forward than I do coming back, right? We've seen some really, really high quality stuff from him going forward, playing the ball into the box, putting passes on a dime. We saw it a lot when he played last year, which was limited time, right? But for the amount of time he was in the game, we saw a certain level of offensive versatility that we were missing from, candidly, Jonathan Dean and Arnaud Souquet, right? So I think you're not wrong. He definitely had some lapses and some weak points on the back end. I guess I was expecting a little more in possession from him than I got. And I think the best way I can say, I can live with a young defender getting cooked outside. Like, it's not what you want, but you can only ask so much from the guy. It's when you're giving the ball away in easy situations, either going forward or, like you said, in the defensive area. That's what is really grinding my gears in a situation like that.
especially when it comes to, like you mentioned, like silly giveaways or something that has been aggroing me for the past few seasons, whether it's like aerial duels or just like first touches, final passes. It's always like those things that for some reason just hook the fire essentially. And we get clocked for it almost every single time.
Yeah. I mean, so back to Reynolds, I asked Greg about it after the game, and he said that basically what you were saying, I think a little bit, John, where he said that he's got a guy that's got a huge ceiling, and then he went on to say that like it's really about believing in himself and his quality, and when he does that, you see that he can be dangerous, and when he's hesitant, it's more difficult for him. And I think that's really basically what we saw. Like when he had that confidence, he was able to get the ball in the box and stuff. When he took even a nanosecond in his head to like consider what happening, the game was at the MLS level is just too fast for him to be able to do that and use the skill that he's got, right?
And I think that's actually a nice kind of transition into the guy who actually came on to replace Justin Reynolds, which surprisingly to me was Omari Glasgow. And I think this kind of goes to a longer point about the Fire's depth, where they are at this point in the rebuild of the roster, right? The Berhalter era, whatever you want to call it. Generally speaking, I was actually impressed with Omari last night. I thought that's one of the better appearances we've seen from him in MLS. Obviously, just because it's a little bit different of what you're asking him to do, right? You're not asking him to be as technical. Obviously, he shot the ball way over as soon as he came in, so not a great start for him. But I thought he settled in well and played better than I would expect of him to play as a wingback, right? Which is essentially how he was playing. But I think there's an interesting point of like, in terms of a team that wants to compete to win it all, in 2-3 years, like or whenever that is, when you've had a chance to fully turn over the roster, candidly, those are not guys who are coming into games that matter, right? And part of that is being depleted, but part of that is we don't have the same depth at 12 to 20 that you would want. So you feel free to tee off on that or just general thoughts on Omar's performance.
Well, I think it's a little hard to say depth at 12 to 20 when out of the total 30 players on the roster, there's 7 of them that are out with injury, right? Like including several guys that you thought would want to start, right? And again, like it's not an ideal situation to be giving guys like you don't want someone's first start to be in a match that feels exactly like this. And Justin Reynolds or like first start with this coach, like you saw with Justin Reynolds. I agree with you on Omari. I don't know what you guys thought. I mean, some of the stuff like Alan, I know you've watched enough Fire 2 games. Like Omari can have some, beautiful balls in, but he also can just sky it sometimes.
Exactly. Like with the Fire 2 games that I've been to last season and previously, just I've always been impressed by him and his physicality as well as his pace. But like you mentioned, just it's the finale is not there just yet.
Right, which is one of the reasons that he was a guy that signed a deal to go into like MLS Next Pro for whatever that deal was paying him, and then a kind of starter level MLS contract rather than like something that took him to like the Premier League or somewhere in Europe and was then loaned out to develop from there. But I thought, I agree. Like I thought his performance as wingback was decent. It was interesting. I was curious about whether it's something that we could see more of him from because it's. He's got kind of an interesting profile, right? Where like he knows where the back of the net is. He knows how to score goals. He can play balls pretty well. But he is frankly like not going to be anything close to the biggest guy on the pitch. He can get sort of like out muscled by a back line. So he's not going to be like cutting into the box and scoring in close very often. And he's, more of a runner than he is, I think, like an incredibly technical dribbler through pressure and that kind of stuff. And so like, that's all things that like a wingback role, I think is pretty well suited for. Not perfect there. And we haven't really seen the defense from him, but I thought there's maybe stuff to work with here. So I asked Greg about it. Basically, if we thought that there was more that we'd be seeing more of that over the course of the season. And Greg said, we didn't have a fullback on the bench, so we had to get creative. And he said, basically, they looked at their profiles, thought they could do it. And so it's not perfect. But when you have these circumstances, you have to make the best of it. So I kind of interpreted that based on the way that he said it and everything, that like it was an emergency situation and it's not something that he thought was going to be happening more, but he could also be playing his cards close to his chest, and that could be something that they could be. I think especially Omari, maybe a little bit more than Marin, who we can talk about in a second. It's a role he could succeed in, especially just given the team's depth chart and that's one place that he could get minutes along with playing more of a traditional winger. But Greg was not hinting that was something that was really at the top of his mind right now.
I do think there's an aspect, and then we can kind of move on to Marin, but I do think there's an aspect actually of in Greg's system. I think Omari's profile kind of fits a wingback more than a winger, right? You look at the way Greg's wingers tend to play, which is they come inside. They play very much on the interior. The wingbacks tend to play a little more outside. I mean, occasionally you'll see Gutman and Barroso tuck in towards the top of the box, but I tend to think that benefits Omari. I don't know that he's a guy who you want to get inside. Like you said, he's not the best dribbler. He's more of a runner. He's a guy who can break out down the sideline, like we've seen from Barroso at times this year, right? He uses his speed. He uses his explosive acceleration to kind of open up and stretch the pitch and move the midfield. Honestly, if you ask me tomorrow, hey, Barroso can only go 45 next week. Who do you want to see in the second half? I'd kind of like to see Omari Glasgow.
Yeah, I mean, Omari Glasgow's profile, like he's closer to Andrew Gutman or like Leonardo Barroso than he is like Jonathan Bamba, right? Like that's just the reality of it. Yeah.
And that's more a system thing, right? If you had more inverting fullbacks or inverting wingbacks, then it would make sense for him to be a traditional winger. It's just all about how the team plays. And I just think for how Greg would use him, I think it could make a lot of sense. So I'm curious to see.
I was hoping to get an answer out of him. Like, it's something that we could like take a look at working with him going forward. It's just not the answer that I got from him. So, I mean, you never know, right?
True. Very true. In a perfect world, those are two guys, both Omari and Justin, who you would love to see like loaned out and getting real minutes somewhere else so they continue to develop and improve. But unfortunately, that is not a perfect world. So kind of the other side of the coin there, we saw Marin Haile Selassie also play in that kind of wingback role. We've seen it before, at times last year when Frank Klopas was running a back three. I don't have a ton to say about it. I thought he performed well enough. He's certainly a dynamic player. He can fit into that role, but for what Andrew Gutman offers you going in, defensively, although I actually thought he played well defensively last night. I don't know how much you're losing with that substitution.
Yeah, and it's worth saying that he came on basically in like the 83rd minute or thereabouts, compared to Omari, who went on, a lot earlier. So it was very limited minutes. I don't think he looked great. I mean, obviously it was not an ideal situation for him to be getting minutes in the first place from his point of view, with the team down and late in the game, and not in his position. But, it hasn't been great from him so far this year. And I kind of wonder if that's just lack of minutes or if it's something that we're going to see him struggling with a little bit.
I mean, I can imagine coming into the season, you have two guys now ahead of you for a spot that was almost assuredly yours, two if not three, right? If you count Brian Gutierrez, plus an injury, plus a lack of minutes, plus, on a good night, Bamba and Zinkernagel are both going 75, 80 minutes. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was a little bit of that and just unable to get into the rhythm of the game. From there, we'll kind of move to what has been a common theme, and we've talked about it kind of on and off as it needs to happen, but it's certainly become a trend, right? Outside of that first week against Columbus, where we saw the two early goals from Brian Gutierrez, Fire have had really just a slog in the first 15 minutes, right? It almost looks like they're walking uphill through snow, just not able to get the ball going, not able to kind of catch the pace of the game. And I guess, the question from here is, right, is how much of a something is this to worry about, right? Do we think it's something? Do we think it's nothing? Could it be everything?
As long as defensively they're fine, I don't think it's a big deal. The problem is whenever they don't come out to a strong start, they get overrun defensively. And that causes more problems. If offensively you're just not finding it for a little bit and you're just starting to get into the game, that's fine, as long as your defense can keep up with it. Which, thankfully, so far the Fire's defense has, but, I mean, it's kind of the case of eventually once you throw everything at the wall, eventually something's going to stick.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't think the Fire had a shot until the 18th minute again this one, and that's late in the game. And it felt like they were being just like outworked and out hustled. Like it felt like they were surprised by the pace of the game. Like Zinkernagel early on in the first couple of minutes had a run forward. I think it was actually the first minute, and he was surrounded by three guys in red and had no passing options whatsoever. And I mean, like there's like that's going to be a giveaway, right? Like unless some kind of miracle happens. And there were like a few minutes later, the Red Bulls had their first chance going the other way that I think really, counted for anything. It was impressive to see Cuypers getting back on defense, and like he was pinned pretty far back in the first 20, 30 minutes, especially too. And he was getting active there. He was like working almost like a midfielder on some of the plays, like kind of distributing the ball after getting it. But like, it's like, I was trying to figure out what's going on because I think that the slow starts, it's early and it's not like a huge long trend, but like we're, a quarter way through the season now. And so it's kind of a trend. And I don't think that a tactical shift happened. I just think that it's the Fire took a little while to wake up. And I think that's been the trend. And that does worry me because you've got guys that are on minute restrictions, like with the injuries coming on and off. It's like, if you've got 60 minutes with your A team, you don't want to be spending 20 of those minutes not getting chances forward, right? Like that could have been the difference. If the Fire had shown up in the form that they had in the 30th minute from the first minute, that it could have been 2 or 3 goals for the Fire before the Red Bulls got that goal later on, right? Like, and I know that it would have been a different game then and all kinds of stuff, and that's not the way that it works, but you just can't afford to not be getting chances for that much of a game.
Yeah, I think I take maybe a little bit of a different side of the coin on this one. I think and look, to me, watching this team, right? I'm not speaking about the United States men's national team. I'm not speaking about Columbus Crew of the Berhalter era. This team, I think there's an aspect of the game of Greg wants, and I'm speaking from my own thoughts here, of course. I think they want them to bring the game to them, right? I think there is an aspect of we are going to observe, we are going to find your spots, and then we are going to pick at them. Because I think typically, like, and I would have to look back, and I should have because I've had this thought since last night. Look and see when those first goals are typically scored, because there is an aspect of this system where it very much is, you saw it last night, Sam Rogers putting his foot on the ball and just saying, come and get me, come press me, and then I will make a play. I'm not passing this ball until you push up to me. And so I do think there's an aspect of this system that is, we want you to bring the game to us so that we can induce a counter.
No, there is, right? Like, and that's it. It's using the ball to destabilize opponents, but that's different than what we've been seeing where the Fire don't really jumpstart things going the other way until about the half hour, right? Because we're talking about a shift in the way the team plays between those two time frames.
And so I guess the longer point is, like, part of that in my mind is there needs to be some kind of a better film study, right? Because it shouldn't, I think they're learning the triggers, they're learning the presses, they're identifying the weak spots so they can take advantage of them. At least that's how I'm rationalizing it in my head. Maybe, maybe it's just me coping a little bit, right? And so I wonder what the preparation is like on the front end, that it's taking them that long to break it down, right? Because you saw it against Columbus, it worked right away, right? And obviously end up losing that game. Yeah, Alan, I don't know if anything's jumped out to you, but that's kind of where my head went with that.
I mean, I agree, especially with Red Bull. Red Bull, I feel like no matter who is managing the team, they have a very specific way of playing the ball. They, how Red Bull ball works. So I feel like the fact that they didn't take opportunity of that, just yeah, exactly. Like, what were they doing during film study, I guess, or like what was going on? I don't know. For me, it's hard to focus, especially when it comes to lineup and with tactics, considering that, we have a rotation of injuries and players that have to move positions around, and it makes my head.
I think that's a good point,
bit.
Right? Like that dynamic start we saw against Columbus, like what we saw was like Bamba finding Brian Gutierrez, and we haven't seen a lot of Brian Gutierrez lately. I mean, again, I don't think that explains how they figured it out in the first 20 minutes because they didn't do film studies in that period of time, right? But it could be familiarity, but again, like Guti's been out for a couple of weeks now. He was with the U.S. men's national team before that. So the squad has been practicing without him for that many weeks, and they've had several games now under their belt when they knew he wasn't going to be available. Again, like I'm not super concerned about it. It's not the end of the world. I just think it's something that needs to shift for the team to be getting the results that they want to be getting.
Yeah, and there is an aspect to that, Tim, as well, right? Of like, you can practice to play without the player. That doesn't replace the player, right? And candidly, like, there is not another person on this team who has Brian Gutierrez's profile.
I was just saying in terms of like whether they were figuring it out, whether it took 20, 30 minutes to figure out how to get those things happening without Guti. Mm-hmm. I really don't. I mean, obviously the team would have been in a better spot with him in the lineup, but I don't really think it was about figuring it out. Yeah, because they were doing the same kind of stuff with the slow start. It's just that last thing wasn't there. They were just a little bit too slow on the jump. They weren't winning second balls like they were. The stuff that started working after that, they weren't as able to do early on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah. So I do come back a little bit to kind of Alan's point, right? Of the turnover, of the lack of communication. And you're not wrong, right? There has been a distinct lack of quality between the first 30 minutes and the last 60 minutes. We can talk a little bit about the midfield, because I do think missing Brian Gutierrez is a huge part of that, right? I think he, not only in how you prepare, right? Because I think Sergio Orahel has been great. I don't think he's been the same. He's not the same profile. He can't fill those shoes necessarily. But I think you lose, obviously, somebody who can make those dynamic passes, who can stretch the midfield, but also you lose the way defenses will approach you, right? They don't have to honor everything the same way they have to honor, that same system with Brian Gutierrez in the lineup, if that makes sense.
Amen, I say to that. And that's why, I mean, I agree with what you guys said about Brian. Like, you can train without the player, but you're still missing that player. And it just felt like there was a hole, like a literal just like trench or canyon even in the midfield, where, as I mentioned earlier, where some of the chances that we got were because of the fact that we just long balled it or just passed it way forward, or it just started from the midfield to Cuypers or Bamba or Zinkernagel. And I think there was like one run where Cuypers was going from the midfield and he was just going way too fast to take a shot on it, and like he got dispossessed. So it's that the workload isn't even, essentially, with the missing players, essentially.
The other side of it too is that it also means that, like, Sergio Orahel, I think, can do a lot in kind of a pass before the pass, maybe before the pass kind of guy, right? And like that's what we've seen from him. He's not as much of a goal threat, and with Guti out, he's being asked to sort of step into a role that doesn't put him in his best light. I think Kwame also did a pretty good job of getting forward and doing some stuff, to kind of get the attack going. But again, like, I don't think it was really anything close to his best game, as well. It's kind of unfortunate that we're not getting to see the preferred trio on the pitch, at least until next week, if not longer than that, of probably Kellyn Acosta, though maybe we should talk about that a little bit. Kwame and Guti as starting in the midfield, but that, I think, like, the jury is going to kind of be out on what the team will look like until we get some real experience seeing those guys playing together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, and they, like you said already, Tim, there certainly needs to be an improvement in terms of those first 30 minutes. Kind of shifting a little bit over to Kellyn Acosta in the midfield. I do want to say it's tough to put too much on him from last night. Obviously, first game back after that hamstring injury. I have a hard time blaming him for the penalty, even though it was his fault. He fell over. It looked like there were guys kind of losing their footing in the box for a good chunk of the night. That's around the same area that Tom Barlow fell.
Yeah, not just that. Like, it looked like it was a slick pitch everywhere.
It felt very soft.
Yeah, like there was bad ball control to the way that you just wouldn't expect from either team with, professionals playing. So I think that was a big part of it.
I do think there's an aspect of, and I think this is important for me, right, of somebody who, Kellyn Acosta has not lived up to his billing since he got here. Let's say that. I think we would all agree with that. Last year, I think you would blame a good chunk of that on the overall surroundings. This year, it's been a little up and down because of the injuries. I do think he brings something to this team that you lose when he's not out there. I think there's a very distinct difference between the team we saw last night and the team we saw in Chicago against Montreal. And I think Kellyn Acosta is what helps deliver that. Not that there's other guys who can't fill that role, but I do think he's somebody who is unique in that way. I think he is, in a sense, kind of the heartbeat of the team like that, right? And so I generally trust that he will find his form as he kind of gets back to health, as he gets comfortable with either Sergio or Romanigue and Brian next to him. So I'm not out on Kellyn Acosta. If you want to sell your stock, please sell it to me. I think he's got a second wind that we'll start seeing here hopefully soon.
Yeah, because I think that was maybe when you see like part of what I attributed that him like falling over to was like I think that he did just slip, but the fact that he was already a step or two behind, I think is what you see from a guy that's coming back off of a hamstring injury, where you don't have that ability to either get up to full speed or to do the kinds of cuts that you normally would be doing. But I think that he does give the Fire kind of like more of a box to box dimension than pretty much anyone else in the midfield pool. I think, maybe we can see some of that from Kwame at some point. Like maybe we could see some of that from Sergio Orahel over time, but they don't really have that now. I think one challenge that we're going to face is, going to like the U.S. men's national team, just kind of like parallel for a second. Some of Kellyn's best minutes ever were playing for Greg Berhalter in that setup, but he was playing a Kellyn Acosta role kind of like a little bit behind and adjacent to a Tyler Adams. And I think that he's being asked to kind of do the Tyler Adams role more than he's being asked to do the Kellyn Acosta role. And I kind of wonder if that is going to limit his ability to get to those heights that we saw from him before under Greg. And I don't know that there's really anyone else in the pool that is like that well suited to doing the sort of Tyler Adams role, which makes sense, right? Because if there was like a Tyler Adams that any MLS team could just grab, like Tyler Adams wouldn't be having such a successful career in Europe right now. Like he does have a singular skill, but I think seeing the way that he's used over time under Greg is going to be interesting, as well as seeing how well he adapts to it.
I think that is where, and we'll have to wait and see, right? Because this is probably, at least, if we're being honest, we may not even see it until June, right? I think that's where the acquisition of Jay Davila could be a really interesting thing, right? All the profiles I've read of him have been very much a six destroyer who can, make the right passes, right? Not somebody who you want to be leading your attack, but can win the ball and then knows what to do with it. So I do like that a lot. It was also why I was interested to see if Fede Navarro stayed at the beginning of the year, right? Because he's a guy who certainly is not Tyler Adams, but is a similar profile just in terms of what he does on the ball, his work rate, his tempo. So yeah, I don't disagree with you, Tim. I do think that's where I'm interested to see when Guti comes back, how Kwame plays, how Sergio plays. I would almost imagine Sergio would kind of be, I'm guessing right now Sergio is going to be relegated to the bench, but we'll see what happens. I think there's an aspect
the rough
of we'll
question,
see when Jay
right? Like, because he's, on one hand, he's like the first guy that you think would be going off just in terms of like closest to like for like, and like who's the one guy that we thought wouldn't be starting. At the same time, you kind of feel like the Fire are losing something if he goes off the bench. So that'll be interesting to see how exactly it's managed. I wouldn't expect there to be like a tactical or formation shift or anything like that just to accommodate him. But, especially if other players in the midfield are struggling a little bit, maybe that's the opportunity that he needs, or maybe he just does end up getting more of the limited minutes, at least when everyone's healthy.
I do think there's a piece of that, though, it's not so much what are you losing, it's kind of what are you gaining. If you're telling me I can add a fresh Sergio Orahel for the last 30 minutes of a game, I'll take that. If I can get 60 minutes of Romanigue Kwame doing everything he can, as opposed to, hey, I've got to play 90 minutes, I kind of need to monitor myself here. I think that could be a really nice kind of profile. And you could flip that, right? You can say 60 minutes of Sergio Orahel and 30 minutes of Romanigue Kwame, depending on the week even, right? But I think,
and again, like all that's presuming that like Acosta does find something closer to the form that he had, because this was not a great game from him. Like we, said that it's coming back from injury and stuff like that. But I think that in some ways, just in terms of level and expectations versus what he added for the Fire, I think that he may have been the weakest player on the pitch for the team.
100%.
I would say in the midfield certainly, but not in the whole of the team. That I would disagree with. But kind of on that note, we talked about Kellyn with the penalty. We saw kind of leading up to that what felt very reminiscent of the 2021 to 2024 Chicago Fire at the end of the first half. Just a few total mental lapses. We talked about Omar Gonzalez being caught kind of flat-footed in the box after Justin Reynolds got beat coming down the left side. That led to the first goal, which equalized, and then of course Tyler Adams, Kellyn Acosta falling in the box, which gave the second goal on the penalty. From my perspective, I kind of chalk this up to Sam Rogers coming out. I think that threw off the momentum of the game. Asking Omar to come in, I thought he played all right in the second half, but I think just he was not ready for the pace. I think if he had even come on at halftime, it would have been fine, but he just wasn't ready to be thrown in and immediately kind of pressured like that.
I mean, on the first goal, I don't know how much of it really is on him. Like, if I'm being fully like, I get that it was a dangerous cross in the box, but like there wasn't a lot of support around him, and I think it's just a header that's directed the wrong way. And like I know it looks like he just is kind of stand there and caught out, but I'm not sure that he was supposed to be man marking there. I mean, I'm not trying to excuse it, right? But like,
it's not fair of me to blame him exclusively. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a team thing, right? I think that the challenge is when you see, I mean, because he's literally kind of got his legs spread a little bit as the header's going past him, so he literally does look kind of like a giant traffic cone out there. And like, I get that the optics of that are not great, but when I rewatched the build up to that goal and what happened there, I'm not convinced that really there's a lot more that he could have done from that point, other than maybe like staying closer to his man. But like, if you're saying he wasn't being fast enough, then making it back into the box earlier probably would have been the right choice for him to make. So again, it's sort of like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm literally sitting here rewatching that ball because I'm trying to revisualize it, and there is an aspect of, I think, just general awareness, and you can put that on Carlos Terán as well. I was not impressed with Carlos Terán last night. I'm generally not impressed with Carlos Terán. I thought he was fine. I think it was a little more an aspect of positioning and awareness than it was. I'd have to look at it again. There's 3 or 4 guys standing there, just kind of watching one guy from Red Bull rise up and put it in the back of the net. And it was a well-placed ball. It was a great finish. He didn't even have to rise up. He hit it in stride. But it was more a failure of positioning and awareness, I think, than it was about him doing something wrong in that moment, if that makes sense.
He also was absolutely terrible with passing. I don't know how many times yesterday he made either a pass or cleared the ball out. It was just every time it was like, oh, great, it's going to somebody new.
Are you talking about Terán or are you talking about Omar?
Yeah.
Oh, Terán. Okay. Yeah. That I agree with. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm honestly, yesterday was one of those games where you just watched and said, this is also part of why he's not in Europe.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, because Terán, it felt like with Elliott out early on, the expectation was that Terán was going to be doing that building out from the back thing that Elliott has been doing. And Elliott can do it well. Terán, it just, I mean, I don't know. It seriously looked like putting like your dog in a tuxedo. Like it's kind of cute to see once, but after a while, you're just like, this is just sad and not the way that this should be happening.
I have a line in my notes that literally says, Terán, disaster class in possession, master class in recovery. And we saw that 4 times in the first half where he just gives the ball away and then he wins it back, which is awesome. But hey, man, don't give it away. Like
right.
Now they've got to throw it in the attacking third. Yeah.
And again, like he was being asked, I think, to play the role that he, like, one, he hasn't been playing for a while, right? So that's a factor as well. Like he hadn't been in the 11. And then 2, like he was thrown in and then being asked to play the role that he's not good at there. I don't know. I I don't think Sam Rogers had a particularly great game in the half an hour or so we saw from him. That could have been because whatever ended up taking him out, that was a non-contact thing in this match, was bothering him before the game. And so that was part of it. But, he didn't have the best game either.
If I may, Tim, I'm going to steal a page from your book. I actually think Carlos Terán was holding him back a little bit. I think he caused him to play worse.
I think that's part of it too, right? But again, I think part of that's like, why was Terán being asked to play that role? Because I was like, the point I was trying to get to was like, I don't think that Sam Rogers would have been worse at the things that Terán was being asked to do than Terán was. Like,
and
I just don't see how he
was better.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing I'll kind of mention in terms of that end of that first half, there were a lot of times where we know this team wants to push the ball. We know they want to score in transition. We know they want to overload and create counters. There were so many times where I saw Philip Zinkernagel specifically just push and push and push. And it's like, buddy, don't. Hold up. Wait for reinforcements. Recycle the ball. Play it around. See if there's an opportunity. I think there was a little bit of I have in my notes written down, it was a weird combination of pressed and too calm. They were overexerting themselves, pushing too hard, and then they didn't seem to have urgency even at times. It was this very weird combination.
It was, it's sort of what I was mentioning, that like the workload was displaced. Like that Zinkernagel, Cuypers, Bamba, they were doing way too much than they were supposed to, that they were doing part of the midfield or even defensive jobs, that when it got to a point where they should be going out, they're exhausted both physically and mentally. They're all over the place. And it's way too much on their plate.
Yeah, and I think that Zinkernagel actually, I thought he had a pretty strong game. I think that there were times, especially early on, where he was the only guy getting forward and he was isolated in ways he shouldn't have been, because he shouldn't have been the only guy that was getting forward. And I think that was the frustration from him. But he had 17 defensive actions by my count in that game. I think that's the second most in the team. Ironically behind Carlos Terán, but I think that we talked a little bit about why Carlos Terán had so many. It's an easy way to goose the stats if you give the ball away, then recover it right back.
I'm certainly being a little nitpicky with that comment. I'll say I don't think he played poorly.
I think that Zinkernagel had one of the strongest performances for the Fire.
Agreed.
I don't think that it was his absolute best game, but I think that he certainly was a positive addition for the team. And I think that the other thing is, I think the two best performances for the Fire outside of Brady, who again was just solid. And there's, unfortunate that he gets a penalty kick that he has to face again, and that one goal was just a header that, there's just not a great,
you
most
can't
goals
put either goal on him.
Exactly.
Nope.
But I think the two best performances from the team were probably Cuypers and Bamba, and I think that Zinkernagel didn't have as dominant of a performance in some ways, but I think that part of what he was doing was the work that enabled Hugo and Bamba to have such good performances. Although Hugo, man, real shout out to him.
So two things. One, I should be more clear. I don't think Zinkernagel played poorly. It was in those instances, it's like, man, it hasn't been working. Give yourself a chance here. Let your guys get in. And part of that is they need to get up quicker. But there was an aspect of, when it's not there, it's not there. Don't try to force it. You have the ability to just hold the ball here, right? And he would lose it because he would get overtaken, kind of trying to move into that final third. And yeah, I mean, if there's a better center forward in MLS than Hugo Cuypers, no, there's not. I'm sorry. Just the actions he has all over the field, the way he plays. I'm being a little hyperbolic, but he is, week in, week out, he impresses the hell out of me.
Yeah, because we saw him do stuff that more like we've seen bits of it before, right? But like we saw him almost playing as kind of a midfielder, doing some of the stuff that you'd expect Guti to do early on.
He's so good.
And like it's kind of funny because again, like when he came into the league, that sort of like thing that a lot of people were saying about him, it almost made him sound like he was a tap-in merchant, right? And we've seen him. I mean, he can tap balls in, like he will do that. He's pretty good at it, but like that's not, I think, really the heart of what his game is.
Oh, but there's so much more he could do.
He's incredibly dynamic, and we'll talk about, we'll take that strong performance and kind of weave it into the last thing we have here, which is, generally speaking, stronger performance in the second half. I think, we've talked about some of the substitutions and the things that really kind of bolstered the lineup. But I guess, Tim, I'll toss to Tim Allen, whoever wants to kind of take it, but what changed for you, or what do you think changed in the second half there?
So I think that it was I think it was a little bit of a tactical shift, but I think that part of it was just the team being less intimidated, and I think being willing to take a little bit more risks, just more confidence. Like the same thing we said about Justin Reynolds. I think that it's almost like everything was magnified with him because he's still early on in his development, doesn't have a ton of minutes. I think a lot of guys, and this kind of gets into what you were talking about with Zinkernagel, John, like they were just spending a little bit too long to figure out what they were supposed to be doing and not enough just confidently doing it. And I think in the second half, we just saw guys that are like, like screw it, we ball. And when that happened, they started balling. It's unfortunate they didn't have a goal. Like they certainly did everything but get a goal in the second half.
Yeah,
I agree. I feel like the team, they got the confidence. Greg must have said something in the locker room that they were like, guys, coach is right. If we all work together, no, I'm sorry. And they all moved forward. It sort of looks like, it almost, to use a hockey analogy, it almost looked like they had the advantage, or if they were on the power play, they were constantly moving forward, trying to pass and take that risk, as mentioned. There were just so many chances where the person who, they weren't exactly in the right place, or it was just too high, or a deflection. It just it's that last pass, or that final touch, essentially, that just wasn't there, essentially.
They definitely, I think part of it too is they got a few minutes to actually just relax. One of the problems when you get scored on twice is you get that first goal, you get that second goal, you're just flustered, especially for a guy like Omar who just came into the game, and it's like, oh, I have to find where I'm at. So I think it allowed them to just kind of relax, sit back, look what they did, and go out thinking, okay, we know what we're doing now. And I think a lot of the guys also were able to actually train a little bit. You saw a lot of the substitutes, they knew what they were going to come into, and they actually looked ready to go. Which, again, apologies to Omar, that was not what he came in looking like.
Yeah. And I don't know why you thought it was a joke, Alan, to say that, like, is that what coach said at half? Because that's what Greg told us, is that he said, look, first half, I think we were lacking intensity. That's what I said to the guys. You're just getting outcompeted, and you need to stop letting that happen.
Yeah, I just said it in a kind of meme manner of.
He said it in the Disney Channel way.
In the Disney Channel, I think there's like a video of a team on the bus, and they're like, and one guy's like, guys, coach is right. If we all work together, and everyone just goes, shh. So that's why I was quoting, essentially. But you are right. Like, Greg, you can definitely tell, and this is something that the commentators have said, and that I very much agreed. They first of all, they shouted out Section 8 and Sector Latino, and they said how the groups, through thick and thin, have stuck in with the team through all the different changes and managers. But there's an identity, there's a philosophy, and there is something when it comes to Greg Berhalter at the helm, not only as head coach, but also sporting director. So
that was Kellyn Carr, who, was with the team for 5 years, including their last major trophy with the 2006 US Open Cup, and stuck through the team through 2011. So he actually was with the team for their last playoff win, which is vaguely depressing, but hey. But I think that's why he was aware of the history and stuff. And he was in the press conference on Zoom, I think on Thursday as well. So
yeah, I think kind of two things jump to mind. One, I do think there's I think there's a solid weight on the substitutions. I think Omar settling in made a huge difference. Like I said, I was impressed with Omar Glasgow. I'm not going to say it was incredible, but I thought he offered something different that Justin Reynolds didn't offer, and I thought that was important. I do think there's an aspect of this. We talked a lot about the identity. We've talked a lot about the system, and we've given credit where it's due. I think there's an aspect where that can hold you back a little bit, right? I think this is a system where you're always looking for the next pass. You're always looking to break somebody else out. You're trying to play unselfishly for the most part, right? Take the space where it is, but make the right pass at the right time. Part of me wonders how much of that is just getting caught up in your head a little bit. And we're seeing a lot of guys who, there's a reason the front three look great. It's because they've started and played pretty much every minute, right? Short of Hugo a little bit at the beginning. The back line has struggled, especially last night, because they're brand new. The midfield has kind of fluctuated based on who's playing, but you see Sergio's look great because he's played almost every minute of the year, right? I do think there's an aspect of that of you can get in your own head and just not let it rip, right? We saw the biggest improvement for Brian Gutierrez from last year to this year was he was not afraid to just put the ball in. What did we see from Hugo Cuypers in the second half? I'm not going to be afraid to shoot from outside of the box or the top of the box or from wherever I am just in an effort to get the ball on. What did we see from Mauricio Pineda? I'm going to play in this little, kind of squeaky backdoor pass to Omari Glasgow and he can find somebody and that dang near equalized the game. So I do wonder how much of it is still adjusting to the system and then Greg finally just telling the guys, hey, just shoot it. Just shoot the ball. That's the only way we're going to score. Because there was a lot of,
make your dreams come true, Shia LaBeouf.
That's probably as good a place to wrap things up unless Tim, you got one more thing. It looks like you were going to say something.
I don't have a great follow-up for Shia LaBeouf, no. So we'll just leave it with we'll leave it with him.
Shia LaBeouf is the best answer to everything.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, as always, we appreciate everybody kind of listening in. Reminder, keep your eyes peeled coming later this week, probably Thursday this week. Once again, you'll see a preview for what the marketing team certainly thinks is the biggest match of the year, right? Chicago Fire at home against Inter Miami. Remains to see if Lionel Messi will be in attendance, much less play in the game. But certainly a big game as two teams near the top of the Eastern Conference table will face off. Huge game for the Fire at home as they kick off what will be a very difficult April homestand here. So once again, keep an eye out for that coming up this Thursday for the match preview. Keep an eye peeled to meninred97.com. Tim, is your hot dog story gone up yet?
I'm working on getting quotes from people. It's taking a little bit longer. It sounds so silly because it's a story about a hot dog, but we'll see. But we will have a lot of content on Red 97 coming up because of just like the amount that the Miami game has been marketed. So all of our normal content, and we'll also have some stories, some of which are this just feels like the right time to be putting stuff out that we've been kind of working on for, in some cases, weeks or longer. So should be good.
Yeah. Big J journalism from us. And I mean that sincerely. These guys work their tokuses off. They're not like me who watches the game and then sits down in front of a mic to talk about the things I want to talk about. So shout out to Tim, to Max, to Alex, John. All the guys.
Mm-hmm.
What did you say?
Look at you with a Yiddish.
Yeah. Shout out to but to Tim and to Max and to Alex, all the other contributors to the site who make it what it is. If you're not familiar, check it out, meninred97.com. It's where you can find the most up-to-date and in-depth news on all things Chicago Fire, including the most helpful roster graphic you've ever seen. With that, to wrap it up here, for Tim, for Alan, for DJ, for our illustrious audio guy, Austin, who makes us all sound probably much better and cooler than we are. Thank you so much for joining us around the bonfire. We look forward to having you next time, and come on, you men in red.